G'day everybody, how you going today? It is so good to see you. I do hope you are super well. Today I want to I want to speculate on three potentialities of what a Z7 III might be. There is absolutely no indication that Nikon is doing anything in that space, and we will talk about in this episode why that might be the case. The Z7 III, the top three best possible ideas of what it could be. Let's get into it. Well, what is a Z7 slash Z7 II? It's a 45.7 megapixel full frame 35mm camera running XPEED 6. In the case of the Z7 II, it is two XPEED 6s. Now, why is it that Nikon might not be in any hurry to replace the Z7 II? Currently, there are 5 cameras with the 45.7 megapixel sensor. The D850, you can still find them around the world, and of course, there is a massive second-hand market for those cameras. We have the Z7 original, the Z7 II, the Z8, and the Z9. So there are 5 choices, all great choices at this megapixel. So why would Nikon pursue yet another 45.7 megapixel camera? All right, well, this is one of the three potentialities. Let's say Nikon does decide to continue to pursue that resolution. What would they have to bring us to make this camera relevant up against all the competition we have today? We know the Z8 and the Z9 are such massive all-rounders. What would Nikon need to bring to the table to make us excited about yet another one? And really the only things that I can think of, because this camera might be aimed at the portrait photographer, wedding, still life, landscape, cityscape, and so on. Slower use cases of shooting, and that might be to bring us 16-bit color. Now that would be absolutely exciting at this level of camera. It'd be one of the very few things to me that would differentiate it between a Z8. It's like, okay, I've got a Z8 and it can do all of these different things. Why would I buy a Z7 III with the same resolution? Well, it's got significantly more color. Along with that, if we're making improvements to sensors that might not be technologically possible, so of course we are speculating here, and that is along with 16-bit color, we do get more dynamic range. Anything really from my perspective that improves the picture quality of a sensor is a reason to purchase this camera. And along with that, perhaps it becomes a little bit faster. But quite frankly, a camera in this sort of category, if it can run at something like 10 frames a second, that is more than enough for the use case it would be aimed at. To me, this is the least compelling of the three possibilities I have in mind. At the end of this video, though, there will be a fourth curveball option. The one that I actually think could be most likely. Number two. Well, two is that Nikon comes in and lands somewhere near where Sigma, Leica, and Sony sit. All of these camera companies have used what we believe is the same or a similar 60 megapixel sensor. This sensor, I believe, was first seen in the Sony A7R4. We're talking a sensor that is, I think, somewhere around 5 to 6 years of age. It is a mature sensor, but it hasn't had much advancement over that time. It's a slow sensor. So one thing that Nikon might bring to the table that again might make people who are sort of interested in a Z8 but aren't really interested in the speed of a Z8, but they do want more pixels, well, perhaps a modern version of this sensor that is faster. It is capable of doing 8K better than, say, the Sony A7R5 currently does. It can also be shot without having too much rolling shutter. But at the end of the day, this would be a photography-first camera that comes with a mechanical shutter and perhaps can be shot at something like 10 frames per second, but it is giving you an updated version of this sensor. Now, if this sensor could be both 60 megapixels and 16-bit, That would be a very compelling difference between the current Z7 II, Z8 and Z9. And to me, this version of the camera is most likely. The third version is that Nikon does something that we haven't yet seen in the market, and that is to create a camera that is perhaps at 80 or 100 megapixels. Now, we do know that these sensors do exist, but to the best of my understanding, nobody has actually put one of these sensors into a camera. I think it's unlikely for a few reasons, the first being diffraction. We know even with a 60 megapixel sensor, somewhere between f8 and f11, you actually start to lose the resolution that you've gained by having a larger sensor as you stop down your apertures. And this becomes even more of an issue as we go into smaller and smaller pixel pitches. Now, if I was a camera manufacturer, I would probably be trying to solve this problem. But at this point in time, there is no indication that we are having a new type of sensor that might solve this problem. There has been some chatter around curved sensors, but I don't know if curved sensors address diffraction. I think they address other issues. But if you have any more information regarding curved sensors, please do let us all know in the comments below. And so there's the three options. We get a higher quality 45 megapixel sensor. We get a higher quality than currently in the market 60 megapixel sensor, or they go for something large like 80 or 100. Sounds exciting, but I really don't think it would happen. So to me, the most likely option is we get a more advanced version, a tweaked version, perhaps a slightly different version of the sensor that we see in the Sigma, the Leica, or the Sony. But to me, the way that you make this a killer camera is you do something that Nikon has done already and has been greatly successful, and we're also seeing other manufacturers do it. And that is this. You put that more advanced, let's say roughly 60 megapixel sensor into a retro body, a ZF style body, and we could call it the ZF-R. Imagine this being somewhat of a next step in the Z7 III journey. Perhaps there is no Z7 III, and it doesn't really matter what it's called. This becomes a high-resolution camera for those that shoot slower, which is exactly what's going on with Leica. It's exactly what goes on with Sigma. It's exactly what goes on with the Sony A7R4 and 5. Now, of course, we already know that the ZF is a very powerful camera as it stands. It has amazing in-body image stabilization. It has some wonderful focusing features when it comes to manual lenses. And of course, it's no slouch when it comes to video. Let's say a camera like this does come to market. I would still think it's a few years away. So, of course, the video spec and the stills spec would be advanced beyond what we have today. And thus, to me, when we think of a camera like the Z7 III, it's aimed at a certain demographic, at people from my perspective that aren't after blistering speed, because you can get that in a Z8 or a Z9. So we clearly know that if they want speed, that is the camera that they can get. But if they want something that's going to slow them down, is going a little slower, and when we say slow, it might be something like 10 frames a second, 8 frames a second. I mean, for me, the way I shoot, 1 or 2 frames a second is really more than enough for most of my use cases. We will never get a camera that slow. Of course, a Z5, I think, shoots at 4.5 frames per second, and I think that will continue to be the slowest camera in the range. I think this is a reasonably compelling idea, and for the sort of people that want those sorts of megapixels, a version of this is great. Now, some people really don't like the ergonomics that come with this camera. And yes, I would suggest for that Z7 III potential market that the ergonomics be a little bit more refined than the current ZF. That would be my only recommendation, although I have to say, once you add a grip onto the ZF, it's a pretty great experience. So there it is from my perspective. That could be what a Z7 III looks like. It's around 60 megapixels. It has a better, higher quality sensor that is either 16-bit or has higher dynamic range. Perhaps it has both. And that might be just enough to get some people over the line versus, say, a Z8 or a Z7 II. But I think if you stick it in that retro ZF style body, you call it the ZFR, I think we could be going places. And we're seeing this, I suppose, most predominantly from Fuji, who have, of course, released the X-T5 not that long ago, which is toting 40 megapixels in a much, much smaller pixel pitch. So if they can do 40 megapixels retro style and it's a massive success, I don't see why Nikon can't do it with a full frame sensor as opposed to that Fuji APS-C sensor, and also that might go somewhere. All right, everybody, well, I'd be super interested to hear your thoughts about this idea. I've completely made this up. I have no inside knowledge about a Z7 III, none at all. Don't start a rumor that I said that this was going to happen. I have no idea. This is me thinking about, well, how do we get a Z7 III? How do we get a 60 or more megapixel camera? And what would probably sell the most? How would it sell the most? What form factor do we need to put it in for it to come to fruition? And this is ultimately what I've concluded. You get 60 megapixels and you put it in a ZF-ish style body. You call it the ZFR, and here we are. All right, please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. It has been so good to see you, and if this is your first time here, I would love to see you again, so please do subscribe, please share, and please like. All right, bye for now.